All right, we're just about ready to get started here, and want to thank everybody for coming to our session today. I think a lot of us are planning to get ourselves and our fellow employees back into the office. It's been a long time coming, and we've been working with a lot of folks who are doing that. So what I'd like to do is bring our panelists in and have everybody introduce themselves. I'll start. I'll be your moderator. My name is Greg Alevris, and I have good 4 decades of experience doing facilities management type activities, and I have focused on how to best leverage technology around the processes that we all use. And I have shared this knowledge and experience, both with other customers and fellow employees that I've worked with. On the panel joining me is Sandra Panera. Sandra, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today as a guest. My name is Sandra Panera, and I'm the Director of Workplace Insights at Relogix. I, too, have been in corporate real estate for a little over 25 years. I started out in FM and worked in consulting, specifically in workplace strategy, since about the early 2000s. My role is really to help companies understand the value of their data so that they can use it to drive their workplace design and strategy decisions.
Great, thank you. Tiffany, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us today. I'm Tiffany Lamb with Horizon, and I've been living and breathing the world of IWMS and space for over 13 years. So my major focus point is really on that kind of workplace experience as it's guided through the use of software to really start talking more about that user-driven data that's easily available from these kind of tools, kind of like an Archibus system or platform that serves both as your space management, IWMS, and even your booking solution.
Excellent. Thank you, Tiffany. Joshua?
Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for having me as a guest. I work with Relogix, don't have quite the history in the industry as Sandra and Tiffany. However, my job today is to work with organizations to help understand the challenges they're facing with their workspace from a data standpoint and build solutions to address those challenges.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. We look forward to a lively discussion, and we'll get ourselves started here. So our general flow of information today is we'll do a little bit about how did we get here. I grew up in a time of traditional seating assignments. We watched the evolution of flexible work environments, and then of course the pandemic hit and things went crazy, and a lot of new ideas have come into play. So we'll talk a little bit about that. What does that mean in terms of current market trends? How does this affect the organizations that we deal with? What are some of the solutions that people need to be focused on? And the big important part is what kind of data do we get from the systems that we're working with, and how do we use that to plan returning to the office and see the results that we have? So that's kind of our agenda for today. We'll keep very busy. If you have any questions, put them in the question box. We'll get to them at the end of the session. Other than that, let's go ahead and get started. So what I'd like to do is, kind of take us to how did we get here? And the first thing we want to focus on, of course, is what are things like hybrid work environments, and what are the goals that people are trying to meet now, because it's different than what it was even a couple of years ago. And what are you as an organization trying to solve? So I'm going to ask Sandra to kind of jump in and get us started on the discussion.
Great, thanks, Gregory. So yeah, it's true. Hybrid working is kind of the new sort of hot topic everybody is talking about. But in my experience, when people who have been working in workplace strategy, the whole concept of hybrid as a concept actually isn't that new, and maybe it's even safe to say that it hasn't really evolved that much either. If anything, it's just become more relevant just due to the pandemic, because we've been locked out of the office for so long and people have had the opportunity to experience what it's like to work from home. Companies right now are trying to figure out how to move forward. They're trying to figure out how to safely bring people back, how to accommodate people based on new spacing protocols, and at the same time determine how to save money. The need for information is now more so to identify the requirements for space, so things like where, when, and why people are using space, but then also with how people are now using space so that they can minimize the wasted space. Another thing is that before the pandemic, what's interesting is that there was a ton of surplus real estate already, but it wasn't really identified as a huge concern to many, and it was just accepted as a necessary cost. But now with the widespread knowledge about the impact of work from home and work from anywhere that it has had on just the office space alone, and the fact that it's increased in popularity, the demand for space is rapidly declining. And while there's still a need to reduce space and cost, there still remains this need to redesign space to better support how people will now work.
Great. So how does that help people address being in the office itself?
So I think the biggest thing is the role of technology and essentially what technology will do for people that are either working from the office or not working from the office. Coming back to the office right now really involves so much more technology. What we're seeing is more and more companies turning to technology solutions like health check surveys that are done in advance to gain access to the workplace. We're seeing a huge increase in the interest in desk booking software so that employees can reserve a desk if they plan on being in the office, and to provide some insights to the companies to get a sense of what the intent is for people coming back to the office. And we're also seeing a demand for sensor technology to do things like detect whether a space has been used in order to inform cleaning schedules, to alert if there's too many people in an area, for contact tracing if there's an outbreak and things like that. So navigating, returning to and being in the office today is just so much more than showing up.
Thank you. And so as we look at some of the market trends and, how it's impacting what people are dealing with in terms of the scope of their real estate portfolio, how to deal with leases and should they stay in them, can they get out of them? Or, if you have surplus space and it's going to be with you for a while, what things can you do? There's a lot of information that we're seeing out there that, people are gathering. For instance, for Dantix, has done a variety of studies, one with 275 global firms. And, one of the key things they found, for instance, is that a lot of the staff is still planning to work from home. And, at the same time, there is a growing interest, but still not peak in terms of how many people will be using hybrid, style work, work between home and whatnot. So there's a number of studies out there that, kind of lead to what we're talking about. And what I wanted to do is maybe take a little bit closer look at one of the real estate studies that was done out there that looks at these firms, talks about ways of reducing real estate costs, and what are some of the things that we can do. And so Tiffany, maybe you can kind of jump in and give us a hand on what are some of the things that people can do to help manage their real estate costs.
Right, thanks, Greg. All right, so I want to kind of break down what we see here on the chart there. It really just breaks down the organizations that all get aggregated, because what you see there being the top right, the top of the item is reducing real estate costs. And this really leans towards whether a facilities management practice of an organization includes lease management. So in that situation, you're always looking to get a better lease negotiation over time. Whether you're a tenant or a landlord, for example, the first place you're going to start is really in your space optimization tactic. As a tenant, you want to see if you can use less space. And of course, if you're a landlord, you can try to see if you can create more subspace for leasing out. Now, you see a few other goals there. And when you are in kind of a lease management situation as part of the controller of how you manage space, some of the features such as decarbonizing or dealing with any renovations that involve lease improvement, there is some limitation in that scope, only because everything will be affirming to the lease agreement or just simply being a tenant, and that's your relationship that you have. So there's only so much you would do in the first place really would be back into space. So across the board was saying that most of these, there's actually a higher amount of these firms that are leasing space, but I do want to consider those corporations that are crown actually. So they own their space and there's not really a financial gain in that sense if they try to improve that kind of purpose of lease costs. So their better return on investment is really looking into how can we create better comfort in the space, which is going to ultimately lead to health and well-being, and even down to talent retention. So when you look at how people roll out their return to office strategy, it could even involve, of course, as we've seen, strategically placing staff at certain time intervals of the week and certain business hours. And that itself will indirectly affect some of those decarbonizing goals and retentions.
Thank you, Tiffany. So, of course, we keep saying and talking about hybrid working and where we are, with occupancy rates. And it's not a simple, thing to apply. So, Sandra, can you tell us a little bit about what are some of these complexities?
Sure. So hybrid is definitely a moving target. Essentially, it converts the office from a place where we work to a tool that we can actually use to do our work. What's interesting is over the last several months, as companies have been thinking about, bringing people back to the office, a lot of surveys have been conducted to try to understand the demand based on the number of days that people are planning to be in the office. But it doesn't really help space planning efforts because you don't know which days people are actually going to be coming in. And that actually varies also from person to person. It varies week to week and month to month. People are just much more fluid with when they feel that they need to be in the office. And so that creates a lot of challenges. Occupancy rates right now are low because also low because of capacity limits. Right, so you have limitations that are being set because you can't have capacity exceed 20% or 30%, and so that's also problematic. Another problem with respect to the behaviors is also interesting in that we've seen a lot of demand for desk booking software and trying to understand the intent that people have and trying to understand, or to gauge how often people are going to be coming into the office, how many people are coming into the office. But what happens is that when you start to reduce the amount of seats that are available and create what we call desk scarcity, people tend to panic and they'll book a desk just in case. And then they don't actually show up or use the desk as planned. So although capturing intent is helpful, it doesn't really identify things like the no-show rate, which if you understand that, you could use that information potentially to dial up the number of seats that you'd make available to optimize the seats that you do make available to satisfy the real demand. Also, with the onset of hybrid work, the other thing is that people really want to know things like where their coworkers are so that they can book a seat next to them. There seems to be an increase in interest in providing better user experiences, which require improved visibility to what's actually happening right now, what's available, in some instances, even knowing like who's around, just so that, because of the fact that you've got people working in different places, you don't really know who is where. And so having visibility to that kind of information is very helpful from a user experience point of view.
Greg, you might be muted.
Yes, we might be muted is correct. Sorry about that. I was going to say, Tiffany, I guess, to kind of follow up on what Sandra was saying, how does the IWS technology help us out?
Yeah, thank you. And that's actually a great starting point, all the things that Sandra was referencing too, because we look at the whole idea of a strategy, which would be we want a 20, 30% occupancy, and then you layer on policies to make that happen. So that could be saying people need to work in a certain neighborhood, they have to work on certain days, there's a check-in policy, and then of course there might be some cleaning requirements that you have to clean the space before it gets released to the next person. So in terms of having all those complexities in terms of a policy, that's pretty fluid because it's all based on whether certain health restrictions are going to be active or not or recommended. And then, of course, subsequently, that has an indirect effect or effect right away, actually, on your space, which also has to be fluid in how you plan it out. Because when you say you want to return to the office, it's a very rapid rollout of that kind of strategy. And once any organization has a substantial floor plate size or employee size, then it's a little too much to handle without software and just hand everyone a policy book. So really software in that sense is really necessary to help facilitate those business rules and then bring out that strategy. So in speaking with our clients on this kind of idea of complexity, there's a real fear of what if we bring out something, some sort of booking tool, some sort of workplace experience that's just too complex for the end users. And that makes it really hard for people to adapt and want to use it and believe in it. So the real simple workplace experience, it really just needs to be about, let's find my coworker, let's book a desk, let's use this meeting room space. So the least amount of restrictions in terms of policies and business rules that you have to start, you'll start being able to roll this out faster. And then you'll start being able to look at your analytics faster. Once you start seeing the data flow in, then you can start laying on other policies as needed. So subsequently, those policies will have some sort of impact to your usage and adoption of any kind of solution or workplace strategy because of all these kind of complexities that seem to happen across our environments.
Thank you, Tiffany. And I guess, Sandra, if you look at it, we're still at a pretty low occupancy rate. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, and I think occupancy will continue to be low for some time. Right now, people still continue to have concerns about, getting sick if they're coming back to the office. They've also been able to work from home and to be productive all of this time, and so many people don't really see a need to be in the office as much. A lot of people don't necessarily miss the commute and feel comfortable with working virtually, either independently or even on Teams, provided that the company that they work for has provided the right technology for them to do so. When it comes to who's coming back, if it's voluntary, it's people who don't have space at home, people who have special equipment needs, and even people who miss the routine of going, like physically going to work. If it's mandated, in most companies, it's people who are vaccinated. So it's a bit of a mix of who's coming back and why they're coming back. What's interesting, though, is to keep in mind that occupancy rates are not going to return to what the rates were pre-pandemic times. And perhaps what's even more interesting is that before the pandemic, occupancy rates were already lower than what most people are assuming those rates were. So for example, on any given day before the pandemic, occupancy was often around 60 to 70% on a good day. So those working away from the office were often working at a client site, or they were traveling, and in some instances even people were actually working from home. So if we get to a 40 or 50% return rate, that to me reflects more of a maturity of flexible working that's actually been happening before, or has been happening before, but which never was really formalized. So this is really providing an opportunity for companies to formalize a flexible program.
Good. All right. So let's go ahead, and we've actually developed a couple of poll questions. The first question that's going to be posted will be, what are you hoping to solve? And there's some choices. You can check all that applies. So the poll is now active. If you look at your control panel, just click on the panel and go ahead and see what's going on. So review the poll. So we're on the first question.
Yeah, and in our world, we get a lot of questions around, are we able to understand using data how much space is actually being used, or what types of spaces are being used, as well as trying to actually quantify how much space is needed. So if they've got leases that are coming due, those are kind of the two main requirements or requests that we see on a regular basis. So it'll be interesting to see the results of this poll.
Excellent. Yeah, so it looks like we're just about wrapped up there. So it looks like people are still trying to figure out how much space is needed, and what types of space are being used are the top two responses that we got from the group. Yeah. And follow up with that, of course, is how much time is being spent in the space, which is definitely an interesting question that I see all the time. All right, let me get back on track here. All right, so as we look at the workplace solutions, what we're trying to, again, is really understand what people are designing for now, or what's been designed, and how the space will actually be used. So Sandra, what do you see going on there?
So there seems to be a heightened interest in understanding intended use versus actual use. And the results of those two are very different. So intended use of space is really just, as the name implies, is, what are people's plans? So you kind of get a sense of, how many people are planning to come in a week, 2 weeks from now. But when there's space scarcity, as I indicated before, which is caused by reducing capacity, people panic and they book their seat regardless of whether they actually intend to be in the office or not. So if only, let's say, 30% of capacity is allowed, companies will typically limit the booking of seats available to 30%, but then, they might recognize through data that they capture of how many people actually came in when they're comparing that intentional data to the actual data, that only 15% actually showed up. And what this does is two things. Number one is it reduces the efficient use of the spaces that are being made available. And number two, it reduces the employee experience because they can't book a seat on a day that they actually might need to be in the office. So to solve for this, knowing the actual use highlights the delta between the booked and the used seats, so that adjustments could be made to ensure that you're able to maximize the use of whatever spaces you are making available to your employees.
Great. And if we look at the actual spaces that are being created, Tiffany, what are people looking for?
Right. So when I really like where this conversation is going, because it falls back to that cycle of space management where you have your planners and they need data to basically justify why they're changing space or repurposing. Of course, there is the practice of you're just told from management that you need to change up a layout in office space, but we're starting to see more and more of some justifications that's needed for this kind of thinking, because there's quite a bit of an investment made in these kind of purposes. So now we're starting to see that the physical layout doesn't change that much within the space when we take a look at the walls and placements. So during this pandemic, what we're really seeing is how can we quickly readjust any purpose of a space. So the information that you get out of software and technology is that it's going to start feeding back and telling you what type of space everyone likes in a very statistical manner. For example, we look at, oh, look, our sit-stand desks are really popular. Everyone's starting to pick that. And ideally, you set your metrics to also warn you that 80% of this type of desk is getting full, so that there is justification to make changes, that now we're probably going to repurpose space to become more of that manner. And then I think I'll take that next question down below there too, because ultimately all this comes back to aligning those goals, whether we're trying to do lease savings and how we use that information of demand of space to basically give up space. So ultimately we are looking to right size, but we also have to understand what is our trends and how can we meet demand now. So for example, if we're saying, hey, our goal is to give a 2-to-1 ratio, if we change anything, can we still support a 3-to-1 ratio in the future if suddenly everyone decides to come back into the office? So there's always a myriad of reasons of why there's a certain demand for space. It could be anything from amenities or even technology that's available in that setup of that space. So we look at things like as docking systems, or whether it's near a window seat, or if there's some sort of comfort and heating elements involved. So when you look at all these kind of hoteling spaces, that will also help paint that picture of popularity of that user demand and their preferences for these types of spaces.
Excellent. So let's take that then, and maybe we'll come up with our next poll question here, which is, what technologies are you currently using in your workplace? And again, check all that applies. So our next poll question will be added to the control panel. And if you can go ahead and put in your responses. So the answers include space planning software, desk booking systems, room reservation sensors, service tickets, and wayfinding. And we're about 50% of the people have voted, and it's continuing. So we're just gathering some more data here. Good. I think we've got a good handle here. So we can see that the number one thing is like space planning software. So I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out what to do around space planning, and then how to marry that up with generating service tickets to support the employee experience in the office. And then shortly thereafter is desk booking and reservation systems, followed by wayfinding and sensors. So very interesting feedback. Thank you folks for answering that question. I'm gonna have another one here coming up. Let me take that and go here. So what technical features are you looking to add to your workplace? And again, check all that apply. So again, let's look at the poll. We have QR code scanning, badge swiping, kiosks, check-in options, health check surveys, etc. So go ahead and tell us what you find interesting. So it looks like we're about 45% of the people voted. Looks like badge swiping is big. Now there's two approaches. I guess one would be swiping into the building and the other would be swiping in to a specific area. So that's good to understand what people are looking for, and certainly using QR codes to scan for spaces that you're looking for is also an interesting topic. So again, thank you all for the feedback. Let's continue on here. So one of the things we thought we would do is just give you an idea of how these tools actually work. So we're going to give you a quick little demo here. And so we'll go ahead and get started. So Tiffany, I'll turn it over to you, and then Sandra, of course.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. It's a bit of a teaser on how that workplace would look like. And because of the pandemic and the health restrictions, we're going to present this in a digital showroom of what that workplace experiences is for the eyes of an occupant through the software. And then we'll see how sensors also play an integral part of that experience. So here's a user that's in their home office and they want to plan to come to work tomorrow. So the key is to be able to book from any device of their choice, whether that's going to be a mobile or their desktop. So for now, we're just going to assume they're going to use the desktop. So here is the Archibus Workplace portal, and the options here are very simple. Just book a meeting, book a workspace, or ask for services. But I've gone ahead and pulled up the floor plan to book a desk. And then you might go and specify a timeline when you're coming in. You might also want to pick locations or some amenities and features that are available. So that allows you to have your preference of picking the ideal location in that sense. So we're basically done, and then we just fast forward to tomorrow morning. So we've entered the office lobby, and basically you can also see there is the option of a kiosk. So that modern workplace can support that and grant us that same experience we were just doing on that desktop or that mobile platform there. So that supports people booking in advance or the moment of. So next thing is you might have your policy. So that could be a health check. So we can do that on our mobile phone. We just confirm we have no symptoms. And then now the next thing we might want to do is go and find our desk. So very simply, we can just go and reference that back to locate the right location. And then that once we find the desk, we can go ahead and check in. And that's really all that takes. So I'm sure you might have noticed there's QR codes there. So in the next situation, we'll show you how that works. So we fast forward at time. It's now the afternoon. And your next goal is that you want to find a colleague, named Elizabeth there. So we see she has an unassigned hotel space this afternoon. So we're going to go locate her. And subsequently, we can see there's a desk available next to her with a QR code. So I'm going to scan that with my camera. We pull up the workplace reservation tool, and then we just go ahead and hit book now. And then, of course, that's completed. And you can see how easy that process is simply with software. And then as well, that level of satisfaction you get for really picking the type of space to maximize your productivity. So there is a third little story here. So we'll fast forward in time and then show you how sensors will play a part with what happens to space. So now a few hours have passed. You're done working with your colleague. You just want to find a quiet place to spend and end the evening. So I'm going to get Sandra into this and then just tell me what happens as I go and look for a space there, like this one that I'm just going to walk up to.
Sure. So when a person approaches a desk, there is actually a desk level sensor that's typically mounted under the work surface. And the sensor actually detects the heat and motion of the individual to confirm that somebody's physically there, but it doesn't know who is there, so that privacy is always maintained. So by detecting occupancy and knowing if somebody's there, we can also detect utilization to know how long the space is used relative to the time that it's available. We can capture dwell time, which is the continuous occupancy. So how long does somebody sit continuously, as well as the churn, which counts how many times somebody steps away from their desk. These metrics all help inform seat programming requirements, specifically sharing ratios, depending on the organization's tolerance for change. Occupancy tends to be the most conservative way to plan for space versus dwell and churn, which is much more precise when it comes to seat programming. The data is captured on a regular basis and is aggregated to every 5 minutes, so it's as close to real time as it gets. This enables us to illustrate live views to support just-in-time space availability, but also aggregates up to hourly, daily, weekly views, etc., to illustrate trending patterns of use in order to support longer-term decision making. So you can see how did this space or this group of spaces or this floor for that matter trend from an occupancy, utilization, dwell, or churn over the past week or past month. When all the sensors are capturing what's occurring at the same time, the beauty of that is that it provides a live view that supports the operational and experiential needs of the users. When that same data moves into the historical view, which is the next day, looking at the data from the day before and beyond, the trending provides the insights that are really needed to inform those longer term decisions relating to the design changes and the reduction and so on and so forth.
Great, thank you guys. I think that's a great way to kind of quickly showcase how all this technology comes together and interacts with each other. So I appreciate you guys taking a quick moment to get us there. So bear with me a second while I just move on to the next slide. So of course, you know, with the IWMS technology, with the sensor technology, we can be inundated with a lot of data. And you know, as I said, I have 4 decades of experience, and one of the axioms that we used all the time, you know, talking, and I think holds true, you know, more now than ever, is the concept of Peter Drucker's, you know, data, information, knowledge, and wisdom, where we have this data of the spaces that we have and the times that the space is being used, the information of the type of space that it is, and you know who's using it, what time of day it's being used, and then you know start gaining from that the knowledge of you know how much of the capacity are we really leveraging, and do we have too much space or not, and use that wisdom to then make the more longer term decisions. So I've always believed in that model, and you know this just highlights how that all comes together. So with that, I'd like to ask, excuse me, Tiffany to kind of just talk a little bit about you know some of the technology.
Yeah, and I'll talk about first and kind of the short-term data that you get out of this. So that certainly helps with enabling healthier and more productive space for the occupants. And from the day-to-day perspective of operational items, with short-term data, you know you can find your colleague, you can find this where this meeting room is because everyone's going to a new building they haven't been to, or maybe last week, maybe that same meeting room used to be a storage space. So it's information like that, that constant influx where you're getting short-term available information to everyone. But at the same time, because of booking systems and even the sensor technology, all the occupants, when they are giving back to you, is that driving of a short-term analytical data. So when they are able to book in advance, then they first off are showing you there's a preference through software. With that data, we can also forecast operational cleaning. And then in that situation where we do have to do contact tracing, then we also will know the area of impact and the people of impact as well. And I think I missed long-term, so I think I had to go talk about that. So when we look at the whole space management and IWMS systems, they're really there to store all those long-term data points. So historically, your IWMS would have always stored your historical data. So long-term would have been, of course, as Sandra was referring to when we were saying there's intended space and actual space. So we're really looking at that intended space use. So using that information, especially when you're trying to rapidly change up your repurposing of space, you're going to fall back to your historical data to see, did we used to have spaces that used to be offices, but somehow right now we turned it to a storage room. So because we're trying to rapidly create more space, we now have the justifications of saying, yeah, this is easy to just transition this back into an office or workspace. Now, in terms of how well space is actually being used in terms of the data we see, it's very quick to just see that there's information about statistics. We can see from a day-to-day operations of how full spaces are. So ideally, you just want some quick metrics to align to your occupancy and information. So we all know that the pandemic itself really started in 2020. So we can't quite say we have long-term applicable data for the use of analytics that way. But moving forward, when we start returning into the office and we can start gathering that kind of long-term data, but until that happens, there's a bit of a reliance on some short-term to mid-term data and use that towards long-term planning. So the goal is to use all this information you can start capturing and use it more strategically for rolling out planning and forecasting. And of course, you don't have to be kind of an expert in looking at data to be able to understand that. The whole beauty is to rely on software so that you can easily see colors, you can easily see curve lines, and then get alerting mechanisms for anything that's a red alert, green, or yellow. And really just to start telling you right off the bat if you are having favorable or unfavorable outcomes. So that information of, for example, utilization, or in terms of how many people are looking to come into the office, it allows you to start solving those long-term and short-term problems of ultimately, did we use the space right? And is there something we can tweak?
Right, so from the perspective of now that we're collecting all this data, what are some of the things that we can do to plan for returning to the office? So Sandra, I'm gonna ask you to kind of talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think to Tiffany's point is that there will be an increasing need for information to support a whole bunch of new things as we come back to the office and just continue to work as we do. So things like, supporting those who manage our work, providing information for those who manage the places where we work. And that also includes spaces that go beyond the traditional office as we know it. So we're seeing more and more companies are, exploring third places as alternative places to work. And so, as soon as you leave the headquarters or sort of the owned real estate of an organization, you lose visibility to how people use space. And, if there's costs that are being incurred, so, there's a subscription fee that's being paid for space on demand, companies will want to have a handle on how much money is being spent and expensed through the organization for space use. And so as we mature through this new way of working, I think we're going to see an increasing demand in having visibility to data that we didn't have before.
Tiffany, you have anything you want to add there?
Yeah, and I think all those points there, especially what Sandra is referring to as well, is really just the need for technology to help keep tabs on everything. And we've shown you how simple that process really could be through space booking tools and then, of course, sensors to help capture that kind of information. Now, if we're looking at like the future of what the workplace might look like, what we haven't seen so far isn't really that much of actual office redesigns. So that being an investment in itself, we're probably going to start seeing more data being collected so that we can start making those kind of justifications. Because as we start doing any kind of change, we layer on a new policy, we add a new complexity, then, for example, forcing check-ins or otherwise the desk gets dropped, then all those things are you're going to see a difference in your data where it tells you there's been an improving process to it, or maybe we tipped off a little bit in our utilization. So using that kind of information is going to, again, help you 1 to 5 years from now, start forecasting how that office space would look like. And again, justifying that investment of how we would best strategically redesign the space.
Excellent. Joshua, you've been quiet, I guess, by our design here, but where do the sensors fit into all of this, design and planning?
Yeah, thanks so much. So I'm just going to quickly wrap up and summarize and quickly show what you can get in both the short term with sensor data, and also show you the insights that your sensor data will be able to surface given enough time. So as Sandra and Tiffany have touched on, with the new hybrid workforce, it's become a little difficult to anticipate how people will behave and interact with the workplace. So therefore, at the beginning of your journey, what you're going to be doing is measuring the intent versus the usage of your spaces to surface new work styles and work patterns within your employees. And as the original intent of the office and design no longer fits. So the immediate data will allow you to evaluate the intention of when, where, and how people work, and then help you identify any gaps within the intention of how the space should be used versus how it actually is being used, and begin to formulate your new workplace strategy. So in the short term, again, you'll be able to measure utilization, occupancy, and people count on floors for individual desks. It's really configurable to be able to capture any building, floor, individual space over any time as well. It will reveal patterns of use at the floor plan level, and will allow you to capture people counts for each of those floors and identify any immediate opportunities to help with redesign or re-strategize if the spaces aren't being used appropriately. And again, configurable by floor, time period, space type, etc. So this first phase is the beginning of your new corporate real estate data baseline, is what we like to call it, and will serve as the building blocks and foundation for your new CRE decision-making process. Okay, you can go ahead and then finally, what will you gain as you start to monitor this sensor data over time? Well, it will enable you to identify trends within your portfolio at a much higher level. So this is when the framework of your CRE strategy materializes and enables you to make data-driven design decisions for your workplace. So you will not only be able to take control of your data given enough time, it will also start working for you. And at this stage, Connexus will start to surface insights that are simple to understand, action, and communicate. With insights such as being able to identify working personas, about how, where, and when they use spaces, identify specific spaces that should be maybe assigned, free address, or bookable, or maybe switching between one of those three options, and then accurately identify opportunities to optimize or rationalize on a global scale. Reveal correlations, cause and effects, and other workplace patterns, and ultimately, again, create your new data baseline with the data that you have, and then begin to incorporate maybe other data sources as well, such as the IWMS systems, booking or badging, to really start to aggregate the quality of the data. So at this stage, you will have a well-established CRE data baseline that will be versatile and provide your team with data and insights that can respond to a number of different challenges and empower you to make those informed, data-driven decisions on a global portfolio scale.
Great, thank you, Joshua. So Tiffany, you kind of wrap up from your point of view.
Right, thanks, Greg. So I think what we want to make sure people can see too is that you can certainly leverage what you have and to immediately show there's a return on investment on the management of space, because ultimately all your data that you're going to try to achieve and get is going to help you drive out the return to the office process. So our difference is what we were showing everyone is that we've shown you how intended data and actual reporting can really help build out that strategy of return to office, and of course help you understand when you can start applying things such as business rules and such. So looking at features such as analytics throughout your whole portfolio is really going to give you that full picture of where you're going to start justifying any rapid changes that you make, and ultimately be able to report back the success of your return to work strategy.
Great, thank you. And I think we have one more question to kind of wrap up, and this is just kind of getting a feel for where everybody is right now regarding work policy. So we're going to put up our last poll question. And bottom line, we know how many people are working full-time, how many people are working fully remote, how many people are using that hybrid model that we've been talking about, and where are people, have even made a decision at this point in time. And I can tell you from last year, I think people were not very decisive. For sure, that probably would have been the #1 answer, but it's interesting to see that a lot of people are really swaying towards the hybrid. We're at about 60+% of people that are, working in some sort of hybrid fashion. And that jives with a lot of we see. I assume Sandra and Tiffany, you're seeing somewhat the same kind of approach from folks.
Yeah.
Okay, so that takes us to the end, and now we're at a point where we can do some questions and answers. I'm going to open up the questions and see how well we do here. All right, so in terms of user experience and seeing where your colleagues are booking desks, are there any concerns with privacy or anonymity around displaying employee names and data? Great question.
I can take that one on if we're talking about workplace booking solutions. So really, this comes down to business rules, and then again, what kind of data at the end user level people are supposed to see. Any kind of solution you look for really is going to have ideally role-based functionalities like we were showing you in Archibus, where you can really set those kind of rules where it's limiting who can see what is what, because your ultimate goal in the end might actually be more so we just want to know if space is being used and being demanded.
Great, thanks, Tiffany. And I think the next one is more of a comment. Multi-selection on poll 3 would be great. Okay, fantastic. Let me just see if there's any other questions I can kind of come up with. One of them, do we need to add sensors across the whole building to have an effective capacity reporting? Which is a great question because, sensors, you can put them everywhere and anywhere, but you want to be tactical and strategic on how you deal with that.
I'll take that one. So that really depends on the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. If you're just studying areas, then no, you don't need to have sensors everywhere. However, that practice of just looking at a specific area worked pretty well pre-pandemic, when you didn't really need to monitor spaces for use to support cleaning efforts, for example. The employee experience is very much top of mind now, and knowing where people are going, how long people are working in certain areas, and in some instances, who the people are that are collaborating with each other. This kind of information is really what companies are seeking now to improve that overall employee experience, because it's more than just about how many desks and offices there are to supply. I wanted to add also just to the previous question around concerns for privacy. There are some rules in some companies where you can't release the name of the person or identify where the person is actually sitting for very specific reasons. Most of the tools that are out there allow the individual to basically allow their presence to be known or to remain anonymous. So anonymity is still kind of one of those things, or privacy is still one of those things that companies are treading very, very carefully on. But I think the key is that as long as you're able to identify why you're collecting the information and what you're using it for, and you stick to that, you're pretty well in safe territory.
Great, thank you. And I think I'm going to take one more question here. And I think it's a good one because I hear it all the time when talking to folks is, what happens to bookings when people don't show up?
I can start with that one. And because really, when we talk about bookings, we are giving the option to book in advance. So it's really about the kind of business rules you want to apply to them in the end, whether it does mean that a booking after an X amount of minutes of no show, do we release it? And then, of course, ultimately, you're looking at whether you want to handle kind of an HR conflict resolution on top of that, because we do see the concepts where someone gave the ability to book, and then the other person, the person one basically booked, and for whatever reason, kind of ignored all their notifications and forgot to remember to check in. And then as a result, they're using their space in real time, but then that space gets released for the next person who books. So now you've got another person showing up and saying, hey, that space is mine. So again, it comes back down to the kind of policy you want to promote in this situation, what kind of rules that should happen. If in this situation where, let's just say hypothetically, person 2 is actually in the right, then it's really coming back down to the kind of organizational executive support that we have for the kind of policies in that nature.
And I'll add to that, I think that's kind of where the beauty of technology comes into play, because if you're relying on an individual to check into a meeting room and they forget, or so they ignore the notifications, then you don't really have a true sort of status of whether that room is in use or not. Whereas if you have a sensor, as soon as somebody walks into the room, automatically there's presence detected. So the system knows that someone is there, and therefore they wouldn't necessarily release the room for other people to use. So that's the advantage of having the technology do the check-in for you.
Great, thank you guys. And I think with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the session. If you need any sort of follow-up questions, you can email either info@Horizon Solutions or info@Relogix, or call the 800 numbers or 88 numbers that you see on the screen, and either of our organizations will be happy to follow up with you. We appreciate everybody taking the time out of their busy days to sit with us, and we certainly will hope to plan more sessions that will help you kind of figure your way through these, interesting times, as we like to say. So with that, thank you everyone, and have a good rest of the day and week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.